Welcome to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, we're talking with Sandy Delamere about riding a motorcycle alone across the country. Sandy learnt to ride a motorcycle on the farm and has been riding motorcycles ever since. It's one of those things that she's always loved to do. Welcome to Forest Chat, Sandy.
Thanks, Paul. It's lovely to be here.
Great to have you here, Sandy. Sandy, what on earth did you do?
Well, love riding motorbikes and had been across the Nullarbor with a friend, did a bit of a lap around and then decided one day that I would just like to do it all by myself and just jumped on the bike one day, actually with only about a week's preparation, phoned a friend in Brisbane, said, "Hey, I'm coming for a ride." And she's going, "Really? By yourself?" Yep. And so I jumped on the bike and 4.5 days later I was sitting there having New Year's Eve drinks with her.
Right. So you started from Perth?
Yes, started from Perth and pretty much just followed the main pipeline out to Kalgoorlie, to hang a right and then hang a left and you're on the Nullarbor for a period of time. And then weaved my way through sort of the middle line rather than the northernmost way to get across to the south. Mainly because if you go through Broken Hill, there's very long stretches with nobody around. And as a lone female rider, sometimes you kind of just want to avoid areas where you know that are too remote, have too many animals, or are just a bit dubious. So there's a few little towns along the way that you fill your bike up and you want to have a mate. So took the middle road and then just had, an amazing ride through all these little towns and through the Riverland in South Australia by the Mare River, through Mildura, saw all the oranges growing and then popped out, sort of went up into the high country of the Great Dividing Range and then down into very sunny northern New South Wales. So, it was great fun.
Fantastic. And what sort of bike were you riding?
So I had a very large ST 1300. So if you're familiar with motorbikes, it's the one that the cops always used to use. And the BMWs of the sort of touring bikes looks very similar. But it's a big black beastie with 1300 cc's, a 30-litre petrol tank, which, as we'll discuss later, is quite important. It had 2 panniers on each side and a big sort of one you could fit a backpack in the back pannier. And so usually I'd take water in one side of the panniers and chairs and shoes in the other side of the panniers and then all my clothes in the back pannier. And again, for a trip like that, people are going, "Oh, do you take water?" It's like, well, yeah, I do. I can fit a 10-litre bladder in the one side of the bike, but you just have to remember when it's full, that side's quite heavy. So,
Yeah, it's an extra 10 kilos hanging off the edge of the bike.
On one side.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, you're talking about balance. And I guess when you're up to speed, it maybe doesn't have such a big impact, but certainly handling around town, if you've got to stop for fuel or anything like that, would make a big difference.
Big difference, yeah, absolutely. So, I have actually had a few, because the ST 1300 is a very heavy bike and most of the weight of the fuel actually sits up above your leg height. So the tanks are quite high on them relative to some of the brands of motorbike. So for a female, I'm almost on my tippy toes on that bike. And so, of course, when you're on your tippy toes and you've just filled up, you've almost got a 30-kilo weight sitting on your lap. So then you have to be very careful if you're manoeuvring around at slow speed, and I had dropped it once or twice after filling up, trying to reverse it backwards and things like that. So when you're by yourself riding across the country, you're very, very aware of the fact that at any moment the bike just may have a fainting spell. And generally there are techniques that even small ladies can use to pick up very big bikes. But it's much better if you have someone who runs over to help
you out.
help you pick it up. So
Which is okay for a servo or something like that. There's likely other people who've stopped. But.
Yeah. And one of my biggest fears actually across the Nullarbor wasn't so much about being out on a remote road in the middle of nowhere. It was more about, if I get caught speeding, there's nowhere on the side of the road where I can safely balance this bike whilst I hop off and get spoken to by the cops. So I was always looking, it's like, if I ever got pulled over, where would you stop? because, again, if a female by herself drops a bike on the side of the road, it's not an easy feat to pick up.
Yeah,
Doable, but yeah.
And I guess in that case, the cops would be there to give you a hand.
Yes, I'm sure they would.
But yeah, and you can always blame it on them.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're not supposed to stop here.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then, from a clothing perspective, helmet.
So motorbike gear, there's some fantastic motorbike gear out there now. So I had a pair of, it was almost like bulletproof pants, but they were made of a flexible fabric so that it was comfortable to sit in for long periods of time. They have a company called Dragon Jeans, spelt dragging, Draggin, like as if you're dragging along the road. And they've actually got a woven carbon fibre knee pad and butt pad and sort of side of your thigh area of, reinforced knitted carbon fibre that if you go for a slide, it generally doesn't rip through. So, fortunately, never had to test it.
You never want to test any of that safety gear.
Yeah. In terms of jackets, I always had 2 jackets with me because, again, across the Nullarbor, depending on the time of the year, it can either be very hot or very cold or both. So my preferred jacket is a leather jacket with all the elbow padding and everything in it. But often if you rode, like this particular ride I did was in summer, I had an air vent jacket that you could pretty much, once you got a tiny bit of sort of sweat on you, it was really lovely and cooling because it had a lot of airflow in it and all the padding where you needed it, but just a nice pleasant breeze through as you whistled along the Nullarbor. Helmet, best thing you need to, if you're going to ride a motorbike, you have to get a good quality helmet because it's pretty hard to come back from brain damage if you don't have a good helmet and you do land on your head one day. And then in mine, special edition, I had like a voice activated hearing system in there so that I could actually listen to music and when riding with friends could speak to other friends just on a little sort of radio system that was always handy. If you're passing something, you can call out that it's clear behind you. But of course, riding on my own, I would just play music non-stop pretty much and have a random track of like 3,000 songs that would just play whatever it felt like.
Start at the beginning and keep playing, because you're going to keep riding too.
Yep. And then just on that note, I also, and would highly recommend if anyone wants to ride motorbikes, is I had some fitted earplugs made that helped with hearing only voice or noises that you'd want to hear, like perhaps a siren, or maybe you don't want to hear that, and also just helped the noise cancelling effect for wind noise, which gets tiring over, a 12 or 14-hour day riding. Much more pleasant to have just sort of nice soft music playing in your head that you can hear clearly. So
without blasting your eardrums out, and because vibration has a very big impact on your level of fatigue. Really.
It certainly does. On the bike itself, I had a throttle lock fitted. Now, in some states of Australia, they are illegal, so we shan't talk too much about that, but I had a manually operated throttle lock, so you could actually turn it on just to rest your hand for points where your hand was getting a bit fatigued or you just needed a rest or change position. It's a bit hard to do that on a motorbike. One hand's locked onto that throttle the whole time you're riding. So
yeah, that's right. And if your hand's not on the throttle, normally you'd go down to, it's like taking your foot off the gas in the car.
Yep.
No cruise control. So you have to,
that's
the only option to keep a stable throttle.
That's exactly right. So,
And it was black?
Yes, a big black beastie. So eventually at some point I will be writing a story about the motorbike because for a motorbike he had quite a personality. So the motorbike story will be written from, his name was Bob, which stood for Babe on Board. And so Bob will be writing the story to come out at some point in the future.
Oh, fantastic. That'll be something very much to look forward to.
Yeah.
Cool. So. That sort of sets the scene of what you did. It's a big, long ride, and you're set up with the right gear and all that sort of thing. What did it take you, Sandy, to actually do that ride?
Well, first, it was great having ridden over there before, or even driven, or even if you've flown over the country. It's like, how big it is. Whereas a lot of tourists come to Australia and they have no idea that it's actually a several days journey from one side, from Perth across to Sydney or Brisbane. And in terms of what it takes is you've basically got to be happy with travelling. To me, I think the most exciting thing is I look out my helmet and it's like this little mini window of a movie screen. So the countryside's always changing and people think it can be boring. And it's just like, well, no, you've just got to have a great imagination and pretend you're watching a non-stop movie that goes for all day. So, part of it's just a bit of fortitude and another thing that's really helped, particularly on that journey, because I was only going to get across as quick as I could, was doing an Ironman. So I'm a triathlete and trained up and did the Bustleton Ironman, which again is an all-day event. It took me just under 13 and a half hours. And
can you just go through what that Ironman event actually entails?
So it's a 3.9 kilometre swim followed by a 180 kilometre push bike ride, not a motorbike ride. That would be nice. And then that's followed by a marathon run, which is 42 Ks.
And in the scheme of things, the reason a marathon was 42.2 kilometres long was that the first person that's said to have done that actually died when they got to the end of it.
Well, yeah, I guess so. They were running to take news, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, to deliver news. So
this is in like Roman times something like that. But that's the reason. It's the distance between two towns, and one of them's named Marathon. The runner actually died when they got to the end. They delivered the message and died, basically.
Luckily, I didn't know that before I did an Ironman, but it certainly didn't die at the end. And I think even how Ironman itself came about, well, there were some crazy dudes in Hawaii and they said, let's make this event super, super long thing and see if anyone could do it. And they started off and they went for a, almost 4K swim. It was in miles, clearly, for Hawaii. And then they stopped and they had a coffee, had a bit of breakfast, and then it was like, okay, let's go for a big bike ride. So off they went. And then when they finished their bike ride, they came in, had a shower, had lots of food, and they're okay, let's go run a marathon. So it was a very casual way it all started out, but now it's just go as fast as you can all day without tea breaks.
Yeah, well, and it's literally a competition.
It is,
and
yep.
People have clearly strengths in different parts of that competition.
Yep.
So you might have done super well in the swim, but then got overtaken on the bike and had to run them down. So
yeah. And strange things happen to you when you do an event that takes all day. And I'm sure any ultra marathon runner or anyone who's done any kind of endurance event, including rallying, if it's something that takes you all day, sometimes your brain does funny things or your body does funny things or, just weird random things can happen in the course of a day when you're doing something outside of what your body's used to, and 99% of the time at some point your brain will say, stop this nonsense. And it's overcoming that mental challenge of like, stop this nonsense, whatever that nonsense is. It could be a random sore knee, or it could be I feel faint, or I've run out of energy, or surely I can't carry on because I'm too tired. And if you have that the mental capacity to say, no, I'm carrying on, your body adapts and just goes, oh, well, they're not stopping. Okay, I'll come to the party again. So, yeah, that was really great.
And how did that apply to your ride?
So the best thing about that was, you know how to suffer, and motorbike riding is generally very pleasurable, but as most people will tell you, you're holding on to two handlebars at 110 k's an hour and you've got to sit relatively still to keep the bike nice and straight. And so to actually have the ability to know what it feels like to do an event all day, it gives you strength to be able to sit on a motorbike all day should you choose. Like some people wouldn't ride anywhere near the distance that I like to ride. And in fact, my longest day on the bike was 1,660 k's. Not on that particular trip, but I decided to ride from the Nullarbor Roadhouse back to Perth in one sitting, effectively, except for fuel stops. And so Ironman training was very appropriate for being able to just sit on a bike, even though I didn't have to pedal. It's just really good training for, holding your arms in the same spot and your legs in the same spot. And
you're doing all the important stuff of balancing and regulating speed. There's probably not too many towns on the Nullarbor.
No.
How far is it between places on the Nullarbor?
So it's a couple of 100 k's, and in the beginning I mentioned the important thing was having a motorbike, I prefer, with a larger tank so you don't have to stop so often. So in a 30 litre tank that the ST1300 has, I could do Into a headwind, maybe 450 k's, and with a tailwind you could do almost 550. So it was quite important to realise what the wind was doing, which is very important when you're cycling as well, and also where the stops were. And some of the towns are a couple of 100 k's apart. So, or not even towns, they're just roadhouses. So you basically rock up there, fill up, go to the toilet, eat something, jump back on and ride till your tank's empty.
So were you stopping at every point, or you stopped every second point?
No, I tried to time it so I was stopping at about the 400 k's mark, which again, a lot of people just don't want to ride a bike that long because 400 k's is 4 hours generally on the Nullarbor, perhaps a little less sometimes. And again, I'd sort of just time it so I'd have the least number of fuel stops. But another thing I also carried was a hydration backpack, because you do get very thirsty on a bike and often you don't realise it, so you end up with a cracking headache by the end of the day because you've been dehydrated. So generally by the time I've drunk the contents of my backpack, if I wasn't needing fuel and the bike's thirsty, I'm busting for a pee. So I prefer to time it so that the toilet stop and the fuel stop ended up in the same place, but sometimes you kind of have to stop twice.
But so there's quite a bit of planning there, and you've got a strategy, I guess, for how you would get across.
Yeah, and also paying attention to the road signs. So even if you're driving there, you kind of every town that you pass through, just on the outskirts, is another whopping great green sign that tells you all the distances to the next service stations and the next 3 to 4 to 5 sometimes service stations. So you have to stay a little bit alert and pay attention to your surroundings, because if you get that wrong, well, it's a long way to push a motorbike. And I've been close once or twice, mainly with headwinds. If it hasn't been windy and I've been barrelling along, maybe just a touch over the speed limit, clearly you're pushing more air. The ST is quite a big bike. It's got an electric screen that if you have it set up high, it's obviously more wind resistant. And one time the bike was very thirsty when I stopped. I think I put 29 and a bit litres in a 30 litre tank, which meant I had probably a water bottle full left.
Of left, you don't want to go any further.
No, and you're kind of hoping you're going to spot a caravan down the road so that you can tuck in behind it. So,
good drafting for fuel economy is a great tactic.
Yeah, and again, good life skills, because if you're used to riding a push bike to train, I mean, in an Ironman there's no drafting, but in the cycle leg off, if you're out training with your mates, you can, you understand what the power of drafting is. You use 30% less energy, so similar to a car or a motorbike, anyone following a truck, if you're in that sweet spot, you can actually save a lot of fuel and stop being buffeted by the wind often too, so...
Yeah. It's sort of counterintuitive that following the truck and it actually stopping the buffering when you would think that it would actually increase.
Certain spots it does buffer you more and your head's bobbling around like those little bobblehead toys you used to see in cars. So, yeah, if you sit certain spots and certain truck types too, that depends on how comfortable or uncomfortable you are behind a truck for a while. And that was actually something my dad was really interested in, because he's never been to Australia and he's never travelled the big distances, but he used to drive trucks, and he'd go, how many wheels have they got? What's it like? It's like, oh, Dad, these things are huge. So I worked out just for him one day that I could pass a 75-metre road train, which I think it's 74 is the max they're allowed on the road here, and I could do it probably, if I was really turning the throttle hard, I could get past in about 12 seconds. But on all the road signs, you see that they say cars should allow a minute and a half at the worst to pass a road train. So somewhere between 12 seconds and a minute and a half is, that's you kind of need to be aware of all that. And again, different trucks have a lot of different buffeting. As you hit the bow wave at the front, you can literally feel like you're breaking through a wall at the front of a truck. So it's important to have your wits about you.
Yeah. So you need to know something about that, and you get that from experience, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Ride and did you talk to other people who'd done that journey before?
It was more about just like, I've driven across there because we love cycling, clearly. Driven across in the car a couple of times, and you kind of know that, in the car you can even tell that there's buffeting goes on if you're sitting in the car, or you can see motorbikes behind them and they might be a bit wobbly, but it's more just by observation. You don't sort of really need to ask everyone, how far is the servos? Because there's a big road sign out there. Google will tell you how long it takes. And you should really know how far your bike can go on a tank of fuel before you go. So that's clearly just experience riding around a bit. So
Yeah, so there's a bit of planning has gone on there.
Yeah. Certainly the first time you go across the Nullarbor, even in a car, it's just like, have we got some water in the back, and have we got food in case, we break down? And after you've driven it a few times, it's like, what are we even worried about? So.
What was the one when we went across the Nullarbor? It was sort of like, maybe I should have put some clear film over the front of the car because of all the rocks and things that can get chucked up along the way.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you have any issues with that sort of thing?
Not so much, but one of the features of the ST1300 is its electric screen. And as a motorbike rider, the last thing you really want is bugs all over your helmet. So on the BMW and the ST1300 Honda, they do have electric screens that you can move up and down to both give you comfort behind the screen, particularly if it's raining, but also I used to find I'd ride through thousands of bugs, especially through the wheat belt, and some days it'd be like grasshopper season, so they'd splat against your motorbike, or you could even ride through a swarm of bees and they'd all splat on the screen, and then if it's an electric screen, you just press a button and it goes down and you can see perfectly clearly. So in a car, you've got to stop and wash the windscreen more often, and again, every stop on the motorbike, you're cleaning your visor, cleaning the motorbike screen, and then making sure you've got, a nice clear view through it.
So you've talked a little bit about, say, the physical demands of doing that, and you've talked a bit about the bike that you used. Is there anything else that you needed that took you to do that journey?
I think just a bit of determination and not to be scared of things, because a lot of people, I'd rock up to a service station and they'd wait for the man to turn up behind me. And it was just like, oh, you're riding with anyone? It's like, no, just myself. Oh, okay. And so some people would say, oh, that's a bit brave. And I'd go, well, if you want to get across country and you love riding motorbikes, you don't really need to be particularly brave. You just need to love what you're doing, and, things kind of worked out. One of the trips on the way, actually, I think it might have been that trip on the way back, I end up riding and stopping at a service station where a couple of members of one of the bikie gangs were stopped. And in general, I've found they don't really like to have chit-chat with the general public, and there seemed to be one guy in charge and two other riders, and one of the riders said, oh, we're not allowed to ride in groups. And then I later realised that, no, they're not actually allowed to ride. Bikers aren't supposed to ride around in big groups. I'm not sure if it's an actual law and that they can be fined for doing that, but certainly wasn't encouraged, and these three chaps were, following the rule. And then the older fellow was sort of looking at the younger ones as if to say, what are you doing talking to people? And I was commenting on it because he had a jacket on, like just a denim jacket, and he had carabiner clips, the climbing clips all down the front. And I said, oh, that's a good idea. What'd you put those on for? And he goes, oh, it's riding along the road and all the buttons flew off. So anyway, then the big fella turns around and he holds his hand up on the horizon and he goes like this, hand width apart. And he goes, oh, we've got 2 hours of light. Come on, boys, let's go. And I'm kind of, my brain's ticking over, and it's like he put his hand on the horizon and one palm width was 1 hour. And so your fingers are 15 minutes each, and two fingers is half an hour. So I learned off, I think they were the Gypsy Jokers, about telling the time on the bike from just holding my hand up to the horizon. It was like, wow, who'd have thought? I learned something on the Nullarbor from the Gypsy Jokers.
Yeah.
So, and it's about telling time. So now it's super useful if you're riding a bike and you want to know if it's 3 hours to sunset, it's 3 hand widths as you look up the sky. So how cool is that?
I never knew that.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's fascinating what you can kind of have these little experiences thinking, well, if I was with someone else, they never would have said a word to me.
No.
So often traveling by yourself, different things can occur. So yeah.
It's exciting and
yeah.
as well. Yeah.
And then I tell everyone, and I learned this from these biker guys. So it's good fun.
Fantastic.
So I think just prepared to be out there, that's one of the key things. You've got to have a go. If I got to Coolgardie and went, oh, I don't like this, you can just turn around and go home if you really want to. But
that's right.
Don't know why you do that.
Keeps some excitement into life. You've got to have some adventure.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've heard about what it takes. Sandy to ride across the country on her own on a motorbike. Let's have a break now, and after the break, we'll have a look at what it means. We've had a look at what it takes. Now we'll have a look at what it means for Sandy to ride her motorbike on her own across the country. Sandy, what does it mean to you, your family, or the community that you rode across the country?
Well, it's one of those things, I think, if you're, we'll call it brave. I don't particularly see myself as brave, but if you're brave enough as a female to go out and do something that a lot of females wouldn't choose to do, you can set an example and go, hey, look, I was fine. I didn't die. I know how to plug a puncture, but I didn't even get a puncture. You know, I know how to figure out how much fuel my bike has. And if I can do it, you can do it. And that's what I like to be able to tell people. It's like, hey, I rode a motorbike and I've ridden a motorbike for 16 hours in one day and I didn't die and I still love it. And the day I actually did the longest ride was on my birthday, and I couldn't have thought of any better way to spend the day than just riding all day. And I think sometimes you can hopefully inspire other people to do just a few crazy things. And you know, that's kind of fun if you're the one inspiring people to do crazy things. And it might just give someone who's always wanted to go for a motorbike ride to say, hey, maybe I could do that. From a family perspective, my dad's always been keen, as I mentioned before. You know, he's always liked motorbikes and encouraged, you know, and my older sister, she was the first one to buy a motorbike, and I promptly rode it into the fence and broke the brake on it, which was quite devastating for me at the time and probably for her. But Dad said, it's okay, it's fixable. So we've always sort of had bikes. And I think then when your family can see, oh, look, they're out there, you know, doing crazy things, riding across that big country, it's sort of hopefully a little inspiring, you know, for them. And yeah, particularly for ladies to just get out there and have a crack. You know.
Yeah, it sounds like a proud dad moment as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think he liked to talk about, you know, his daughter riding across the country. So yeah, so it's all good fun.
And then you're going over to see a mate?
Yeah, so the friend that I was visiting on that particular trip, she just said, oh, I'm having a bit of a boring New Year's. Like, oh, might as well come over. So, and everyone thinks you're crazy for doing that kind of stuff. That's part of the fun. You know, we were just talking earlier about quotes about Helen Keller saying life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. So you might as well go with the daring adventure.
You bet.
Yeah.
Oh, is anything else in the meaning space that we could explore?
Maybe just, I think for me also, like I've been interested in writing, and around the motorbike, I think sometimes, like, he certainly had a personality, and we go, well, it's just a thing. It's just an object. But I do think there is energy in objects, and I think he was definitely an example of, like, you'll get to read about it in my book one day, but I'd hop on the bike and we'd be heading off along the pipeline. You'd be going, oh, this pipeline thing, what's that about? So it'll be almost like I was having a conversation with him, and it was just about connection of, I don't even know if it's a connection of myself to myself or myself to the bike, that it was just like you're almost explaining it to a friend or a point of view. So for me, it's kind of like having that thing in your life that you really love so much, and everybody has something that they really love so much, and sometimes it can be something like a motorbike, or, you know, your favourite pushy, or your favourite car, or, you know, a friend who was just loving Porsches and ended up with a Porsche, and all those kinds of things. So it's about allowing yourself to have an interaction of some kind with what we perceive as humans to have an inanimate object, but it's actually got a personality. Like, you know, with the day I was nearly running out of fuel, it was almost like the bike was saying to me, my God, thank God for that. I'm so ready for a beer. And which was, you know, unleaded fuel. Lovely, lovely. Here we go. And on the way back, it was the day before I did the big trip was Valentine's Day, which is the day before my birthday. And it was almost like this little a date with the bike, which is, for all purposes an inanimate object. However, it was just like, wow, we got to spend the whole day together. And from the bike's perspective, it was like, yeah, we had this great lunch date, and we, we rode a couple of 100 Ks, and I got my favourite, 95 fuel instead of just that boring unleaded stuff that just tastes disgusting. So it's, to me, that's where there's sort of a bit of, say, soul connection with an object. And I know people definitely have it with animals like dogs and horses. And I actually believe that, a motorbike has a personality too. So kind of a connection, about that. And I guess also a lot of people ride motorbikes, and there's been, I can't remember the story, but it was a chap with mental health issues who'd actually written about his motorbike and how riding it helped him to overcome, mental health issues. And, it's just such a fun thing to do if you enjoy doing it. Some people are terrified, so that wouldn't be a good mental health exercise. But I think, from a feeling alive point of view, it's a little bit like a surfer loving the waves. And for people who love riding motorbikes, it's just that, getting enjoyment out of life just simply by sitting on top of this big engine and riding off down the road.
Off into the sunset, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Whether there's the connection between you and yourself, as you mentioned, or whether it's between you and the bike, it gives you a platform to actually explore that interaction that you're having.
Yeah, and to recognise that it's just joy in life that you get from sharing with perhaps somebody or someone who loves to ride a motorbike, or perhaps just sharing it with yourself and the bike. So, yeah.
So there's a lot of meaning in actually taking yourself away on the motorbike to cross the country, in this case, for both you, your friends and your family, which is great to hear. Let's have a break now, and after the break, we'll talk about how you do it. We've had a look at what it means to cross the country on a motorbike on your own. Now, let's talk about how you do it. Sandy, how does someone recreate what you've done? What would they do?
Well, I guess the first thing is you need both a motorbike and a licence to ride a motorbike. In Western Australia, it is slightly different to some of the other states. But over here, and again, I had a licence in New Zealand, but I never progressed kind of essentially from your Ps to your full licence. So when I arrived in Western Australia in my 20s, they said, no, not official, you can't have that part. So it was like, oh, well. So a few years later, ended up getting a motorbike, and so went through, you have to do an online test, even if you've got a car licence. So learner's test online, then you're allowed to ride a motorbike. So you don't have to even know how to ride one. You can just go out and ride one after getting your learner's, which is an online test. And you have to ride with a shadow here. So a shadow being you've got to find a mate who has a full licence to ride around with you, and even perhaps to teach you how to ride the motorbike until you feel you're proficient enough to pass a test. I would highly recommend, if someone has never ridden a motorbike, just go to a riding school, and they will teach you everything you need to know about the way you sit on the bike. Head check's the most important thing, because you need that when you're crossing intersections. I'm sure everyone's seen YouTube videos of motorcyclists or scooters being taken out by cars going through red lights, and it's like, as a motorbike rider, I feel it's our responsibility. So when you go to an instructor, they teach you about head checks, and if you go to sit your licence and they don't see your helmet physically move, even though your eyes can see, peripheral vision, if they don't see your helmet move in the direction of the side streets, they will fail you. So it's very important, and you realise later that you need to be looking everywhere. Every intersection I go through, even as a car driver now, I will look both ways, because we all know that there's crazy idiots out there who don't see red and don't stop, or they see red and they do carry on through. So most important, to get the benefit of an instructor for the first pass. And then if you successfully passed your test after, a booking appointment with the transport department, you can ride around essentially like a P-plater. However, on a motorbike, you're allowed to ride around as much as you like, but you can't ride a bike unless it's learner approved which used to be only 250 cc's, so a small motorbike. But now you can ride up to a 500 or thereabouts cc bike, so long as they call it LAMS approved in Western Australia. So it's a bike that's not too powerful that you're going to take off at the lights and kill yourself on, basically. So you need to do that. And then if you want to ride across the country, you probably don't want to do it on a 250. There is a great story of people who've ridden across on postie bikes, which, top speed 80 k's an hour, and they're a 50cc bike. But I find it's much more comfortable to ride across on, 1,000 cc's plus. So if you want to do that, you have to go back for your full bike licence, which involves, again, either more lessons or just another test if you're brave enough to think that you'll pass without an instructor around. And again, you can't ride to the test on your own on a big bike because you're not valid to ride that bike just yet. So you have to find a mate who can ride with you who's got that class or above when you go for your tests. So you need the bike, you need to be able to pass 2 tests here. In South Australia, I believe you can just go for a weekend course over a couple of days and then they set you free, which I'm not sure that that's the best idea. I do like the West Australia way where there's a 1-year time frame where you have to have that, smaller bike and ride around on that for a year to get used to the idea of people doing crazy things. And then pass your test and then go off and grab the biggest, most comfortable bike that you personally think you can handle and away you go.
I'm sure there's more to it than just grab the big comfortable bike, because you talked about having panniers and carrying water and all sorts of stuff. So how do you get yourself set up for that?
Well, particularly for ladies, firstly, it's a good thing. Buying a bigger bike, they generally have a higher seat height. So most bikes you can go online and it will tell you what your inner leg length to the ground is likely to be for that bike. So it might help to measure your own, but most of the time you go along and sit over the bike. To do a ride with a big, heavily laden bike, even if it was a trail bike, they're typically a lot taller bike. As a female, you need to be able to get at least 1 foot on the ground if it's a trail bike, but preferably 2 for a road bike, because you need to be able to balance all that extra heavy weight. And again, just being aware, you don't have to have panniers. You could strap a bag on the back, which is perfectly fine, but it's much more fun to have it all sort of decked out and all nice and comfy and things with their own places and plenty of room for spare tube repair things and reaming tools to get that hole in your tyre so that you can get it pumped up again. And I used to carry little canisters like you use on a push bike, but they make motorbike size ones, so I'd have a little pack with about 10 of those in just in case. Never had to use them, touch wood, never will have to. So a bit of consideration around gear, how hot it's going to be, how cold it's going to be, and how long are you going to be riding for, because you might start riding around Australia and decide never to come back.
Or just keep doing laps.
Yeah, and loading the bike correctly once you've decided, because I think females, we're quite famous about taking more stuff than we really need, particularly if you're going by yourself. It's like, I better take the mini compressor and I better take 10 canisters, whereas if you're riding with 2 of you, that means if you took 10 each, you've got 20. You might not need 20 on a off chance that you get a flat tyre. And then just a few other bits and pieces. Have you got something to clean your screen with? If there's bugs and you suddenly ride through them and it's still 100 k's to the next servo, you want to be able to spray a little bit of detergent on your motorbike helmet and clean it off. And hydration, important to think about. Backpack with water or bottles. I did ride with a friend once who was hallucinating at one part of the ride, which we think was probably just from dehydration. Wow. So it can affect you quite severely if you aren't well prepared and don't have something as simple as water on you.
Right. Yeah. And then how did you actually go about, where did you stop? You're riding 10, 12-ish hours a day. That's not all day. There's a bit of, I'll say, rest or break time in there. What do you need?
So most of the time it was just stopping at servos, particularly because the part on the Nullarbor is, that's all there is out there is, I said probably 5 famous service stations that you can even play golf all the way across it, a hole at each of the service stations. Once you get through the Nullarbor part and into South Australia, depending on which way you go, there's a lot more regular towns, except perhaps the Broken Hill direction. And in the other small towns, it was always plenty of places to look for to have a break. But generally, I'd just ride till I needed fuel or was really hungry, which more likely to need to go to the toilet, stop somewhere and have a little break that way and wander around. And the other thing I found is riding a motorbike versus driving a car. In a car, you sit there and you're just sitting pretty still the whole time, whether you're driving or a passenger, and you can't just stand up and you can't just do a few yoga moves. Now, on a motorbike, you can. So I had music, as I mentioned, in my helmet, so I just bop along, and sometimes I'd stand right up, stand riding up like you do on a trail bike and just bop away to the music for a bit, so you're stretching your legs, and occasionally, because I do yoga, I'll put one leg out as far back on the bike as I could and sort of ride along like half a praying mantis and stretch out a bit. And as long as you've got 2 hands and 2 feet on the bike at all times, that's the road rules. Yeah, so it was kind of, it's easier in a way than in a car because you're not sitting like dead stock still. So you've got the opportunity to move and stretch. And as I mentioned, the throttle locks before, you can take that poor old right hand off the throttle for a short period of time if you need to just like have a stretch or get some more water or scratch an itch or, or things like that. So, yeah.
Oh, do you do any other things in the way of letting people know where you are or anything like that?
Yeah, generally I try to. I'm probably less good at it than my partner Dan is when we go in the car. He's very good at letting his brother know if we're going to remote places. For that particular trip, my friend was expecting me in roughly 4 days' time, so I think if I didn't turn up, she might have called someone or been a bit worried. But yeah, usually you let a couple of people know if you're going to do something like that. And sometimes I'll arrange a friend and say, look, can I just check in with you at the end of each evening? Oh, yep, I'm here. No worries. Just to say, yep, I made it and I'm safe. And yeah. And back to that was, for me, most of the time I'd just stop at roadhouses or motels if there were motels available. Again, some people camp on motorbikes, but you need an extra chair and a tent and cooking things and, all that extra stuff if you're going to camp. Whereas I find particularly like that time of the year was hot, and there's nothing nicer than just being able to get into a motel room and just take off all your gear. Your motorbike gear is heavy, it's not flexible, so you just want to throw it off as quick as you can and then maybe hop in the shower and just hang out. So that was always a good part of like stopping for the day if you could find a nice motel or at the worst a cheap roadhouse.
But somewhere you can just leave the gear for a bit and
just
relax.
Yeah, definitely. And I think these days, like when I rode across, it was a few years ago, these days you probably want to call ahead for at least for the Nullarbor part, because the roadhouses are extremely busy and there's so many truck drivers that some of them don't want to sleep in their trucks. So they'll sleep at the roadhouses and book motel rooms there. And again, so many more people travelling in 4-wheel drives with campers that go, oh, we've just been in the bush for 5 days straight, let's stop in at the roadhouse. And so therefore on a motorbike, it's more important that you have a room rather than just chancing it in the car. Worst going to happen, you can just sleep in the car. So
so that's really just a planning ahead. So
I think if you were doing it for the first time, you'd probably want to just check. Just check that you can get a bed for the night.
Check and be sure, or you'll be sleeping in the gutter, so to speak.
Yeah, or else knocking on someone's door. Hi, have you got a spare bed in this room? Haven't had to resort to that.
Oh, thank you very much, Sandy, for being on Forest.chat. It's been great having you here.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's been fun to have a chat.
Our Forest.chat listeners wish you all the best with your future endeavours.
Thank you very much, and watch out for the book when it comes out.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode we talked with Sandy Delamere about riding across the country on a motorbike. Remember, there are 3 ways to get involved with Forest.chat. Share the domain Forest.chat with your friends and family and people you meet. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. Book an advert at forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to being with you for the next episode. Until then, enjoy making it happen.